All right, Packers, welcome. Bienvenidos. Ni hao, ¿cómo estás? Assalamu alaikum, shalom, bonjour. Good to see you, or good to be with you at least, and connect with you. Weird without some of those signals, right? The old senior countdown on the library windows, some of those other trappings that help us kind of see how things are going. Without those, all of a sudden we look and we say, there's just really 3 weeks of school left, and kind of two, depending on how you count, which is wild, right? In some ways, and this has been part of what this whole experience has been, is that our definition of time, how we feel time, has definitely changed. So what I want to do today is just make sure that everybody knows where we're headed for the rest of the year, the school year, and then focusing on what our focus is going to be this week, right? So, three interesting thoughts for the day. One, President Obama gave a graduation commencement address to the class of 2020. Two caveats. One, I think it's pretty clear he subtweets President Trump once. But I think even if you are a President Trump supporter, or even if you don't like politics or President Obama, I do think that you, as the class of 2022, should listen to his commencement address. It really tries to frame things not in a positive light, but in a realistic light. And I think it would be a good thing for you to do when you need a brain break. And then this message just came to me as I was thinking about the students who are struggling. Now, chances are, if you're watching this, you're pretty locked in and you're proud of the work that you've done. But as we think about these scientists, all these workers who are working hard to find a vaccine for COVID-19, just think about what that means for them. Think of how many mistakes you need to make in order to get to a vaccine. It's an incredible amount of mistakes. And so we can see ourselves and learn from that experience, knowing that certainly during distance learning, I've made mistakes. Most of you probably would admit to making a mistake or two. And just know that that's what it takes to do great things. The people who are going to make the vaccine are not the ones who are going to get overwhelmed, throw up their hands and say, I quit. But in fact, the heroes, if and when a vaccine is ultimately, and not for some time, scientists tell us, right? We've never gotten a vaccine in less than 2 years. But when that does happen, that's going to be the group that has stuck with it, has overcome things. And that's a good piece of evidence that life is not smooth sailing, right? And I think we don't think any of us need reminders on that. And then finally, not a huge deal, but a good distraction. The guy who does stuff for the State High School League came up with this nickname challenge. And I know you can't see it now, but you find it on the internet pretty easily. Came up with the best nicknames in high school sports. And we didn't receive a seed number, which means we're a little bit lower on the rankings. But the South St. Paul Packers, paired with the Austin Packers, has a big showdown here against the Elk River Elks. I got to think that the nickname Packers is better than the nickname Elks. But then in the next round, we'd have to face off against the Broncos or the Greyhounds. Just kind of a silly distraction, which has been one of the fun parts of this weird time, right? Is people finding silly ways to entertain themselves. Right. So where are we headed? The rest of the way. Okay. So in theory, and I want to be clear, this doesn't apply to everybody, but at the end of 2 weeks, which is finals, not this week, but next week, you could be done with your sophomore year. Not guaranteed, but if you do school this week and you do school all next week and you like your grades, you're done, right? The first week of June, which is usually our finals week, has been flipped into kind of like a who needs help getting caught up, where did we go wrong kind of thing. So this week, we're going to look at the Latino, Hispanic, Latinx experience from the civil rights perspective. Remember, Unit 8 is about civil rights, right? We looked at it broadly. Then you focused on the African American civil rights experience last week. Hopefully you've submitted one of those 4 options. This week, we follow a very, very similar layout with the Latino Hispanic perspective. You will choose a topic and prove that you learned about it. So that's this week's focus. Next week, we don't have any school on Monday because of Memorial Day. And then you'll have 2 days that you'll meet for day 2. That's where you will choose another group to study, right? Could be any number of different groups of people who have lacked or been denied civil rights. So you'll choose one more group to study. And then when we look back on Unit 8, we'll have looked at African American civil rights experience, Latino Hispanic civil rights experience, another group that you found interesting, okay? And that will be our Unit 8. And that last week, your final, will be to turn in a learning activity for that group. So with 4 class periods, it'll be research learning activity, research learning activity, right? I will throw in a reflection that you'll be able to do at any point next week as well, but that's it. That's what we're doing. And then that first week of June, as I said, would be for the student that didn't have their Wi-Fi for a week and fell behind, or didn't think this was real and then realized, oh, wait, I need to get some stuff done. Or maybe you just needed a little more time in math or history or whatever, right? So this is where we're headed. Hopefully that maybe creates some questions. Just shoot them my way. Or maybe it gives you a better sense about where we're headed. So last week, looked at the African American experience. This week, looking at the Latino, Hispanic, Chicano, Latinx experience, and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And so we looked at these pictures last week. We have Cesar Chavez, who could be somebody that you could research. Julian Castro ran for president in 2020, didn't make it very far, struggled to get attention, but was in President Obama's administration, and a lot of people feel that he is an up-and-coming star in politics. Now, when we talk about Latino, Hispanic, etc., it's important to note, just briefly, stay with me now, I know there's a lot on this page, but we're not talking technically about a race, we're talking more about an ethnicity, right? And it's a little bit confusing, and it has to do with the fact that we've kind of made up what race means, right? Now, where we have African American and Black, and we call that a race, even though African Americans descend from people from all over Africa. So that's a pretty broad group, but we still in our country choose to define Black as a race. Now you can see on this list, as we look at population by race, we don't see any mention of Latino or Hispanic. And that's because technically we don't consider it a race. Instead, about 18% of Americans identify as Hispanic or Latino, okay? So technically, it's the second largest group in the United States if we look at race and ethnicity. About 70% of Americans identify as white, about 13% of Americans identify as Black or African American, and about 18% identify as Latino or Hispanic. Now, another fast-growing group that many of us identify in as 2 or more races. And of course, on the US Census, you can choose, your family this year chose how they wanted to be identified. But that's just to give you a sense that we're talking about a significant group, Latino or Hispanic. We're talking about a growing group. And so really a group that's going to have a big impact on the United States, has had a big impact and will continue. Now, what it is you can look at for this week's research, again, similar, you're only responsible for one source. You'll do the same research on the 5 whats. On the textbook, if you have no idea, it'd be good to look at those 4 pages as a place to start. Threw a lot of ums at you today, minus 2 points for that. Dolores Huerta, I put her up first because she's often forgotten even though she worked with Cesar Chavez and is super important. Cesar Chavez, obviously, if you take Concord all the way into St. Paul, it jags to the west or to the left, and it turns into Cesar Chavez Boulevard. He is kind of an icon of the civil rights movement. Some similarities to Martin Luther King, commitment to nonviolence, deep Christian faith, but different story, different tools, and different goals. So Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta kind of worked together. You can see we have a variety of different articles to read about those 2 people. Again, you're choosing one. The 1968 blowouts, a lot of students like to study that because it has to do with high school students who essentially went on strike. They were so disgusted with the situation in their high school. And of course, I put down that they recognized that education is power, that if their school wasn't as good as the quote unquote white school, that they were losing power. That was important to them. Some of the groups that Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez formed are in this section. The Chicano movement in general, right? This would be the broader movement, just like we looked at the broad African American movement in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't just Martin Luther King. The same is true with the Latino, Hispanic, Chicano movement in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't just Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Bracero program and some modern issues. So you'll choose one of those, do the 5 W's, and then just to be clear, what I'll do tomorrow, even though it is not a day 2 tomorrow, I still will unlock Thursday's folder, so you can at least look at those options for work to do one of those 4 topics. It'll be the same thing we did with the African American experience, but you can choose the same, but then you can't do the same topic the following week. So if you wrote a paragraph African American week and you write a paragraph during Latino Hispanic week, you can't do a paragraph on your final week when you choose the group that you'll study. So obviously this video might have unlocked a lot of questions for a lot of people, and this would be a good example of a time where it would be good if we were in person or in a Zoom or in a Google Meet. But feel free to reach out to me, email or Schoology or Remind or whatever. But I think that covers everything that I had hoped to go through with you. And y'all have done really good about reaching out when I've fallen short and needed to give more information. So 2 more weeks of school, really, for most of you. Then your sophomore year is completed. And what it's going to be for us is a week of Latino Hispanic research and a small project. And then finals week, you choose the group, and we'll keep you abreast of those. I care about you. I miss you. I hope you are well. Reach out for help. Take care. Go Pack.